Have you ever looked into a child's eyes and felt that something was terribly wrong, even when she said nothing at all? When a little girl whispered, "Please don't send me home," everyone froze until a millionaire stopped and asked the one question no one else dared to ask. What he discovered changed everything. Before we go on, allow me to wish you peace and good health. Tell me, from which country and at what time are you watching this story? The morning fog hung low over Beaver Lake, rolling like slow breath across the still water. Elliot Ward stood by the window of his lake house, coffee cooling in his hand. The reflection of the mist blurred the outline of his face, making him look older than 42. The house was silent, too silent, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the old wall clock that hadn't been reset since last autumn. He'd bought the house for peace, but peace had begun to sound a lot like punishment. Since Sarah's passing, the rooms had turned hollow, holding only echoes of half-finished conversations and the rustle of paperwork that didn't matter anymore. A mug sat on the counter beside another that hadn't been touched in weeks, the one that used to belong to her. Every morning, he told himself he'd drive into town for breakfast, maybe stop by the diner near Merriman Avenue, but he never did. He'd pour another cup, stare at the empty porch swing, and convince himself tomorrow would be the day. A phone buzzed on the counter. A message from his assistant, something about a pending contract. He ignored it, scrolling past the photo of his daughter, Lila, in her second-grade uniform. It had been months since he last saw her in person. After the custody hearing, she'd stayed mostly with her Aunt Vivian, Sarah's sister, in a small house closer to town. Vivian had insisted, "You're too busy. Let me handle her routine for now." And he, too exhausted to argue, had nodded. Elliot had always been good at avoiding pain by burying himself in work. Yet that morning, as a breeze pushed open the screen door and carried in the faint scent of pine, he felt something stir unease. He couldn't tell if it was guilt or instinct, but it lingered like a shadow at his back. The mailbox outside creaked when he opened it. Among bills and letters sat a hand-drawn envelope addressed in careful, childish handwriting, "To Daddy." Inside was a folded sheet of notebook paper, colored with uneven crayon strokes. The drawing showed three people holding hands beneath a bright yellow sundae. One figure, his, was drawn in blue, the woman in pink, and the little girl between them in green. At the bottom, it read, "I miss you. Aunt Vivian says you work too much. I wish you'd come to my art show. Love, Lila." End one. Elliot sank onto the porch steps, the letter trembling in his hand. The air smelled of wet leaves and lake water. Behind him, the screen door slapped shut. He remembered Sarah's voice, clear as a bell from a life ago. "Don't ever let work steal the best of you, Elle. The best of you belongs to her." For the first time in months, he didn't check his watch or his phone. He just sat there, watching the water ripple, feeling the ache of time wasted and the weight of silence pressing in. He didn't notice the small gray car parked across the road until it drove away, a flash of silver vanishing behind the maples. Something in his gut told him the stillness of Beaver Lake was about to end. The next morning broke with the scent of rain. It wasn't a heavy downpour, just the kind that whispered on rooftops and made the air smell clean again. Elliot stared at the letter on his kitchen table, creased, slightly smudged from his thumbprints, and realized that, for once, he didn't want to wait for tomorrow. He grabbed his jacket, keys, and the old thermos Sarah had given him years ago. The engine of his pickup coughed to life. The tires hissed over the wet road as he headed toward Street Augustine Elementary. The drive took 20 minutes, but it felt like a journey through years of absence. He passed the small diner where he used to take Lila for pancakes, now a little rundown, a closed sign swinging in the drizzle. The radio hummed a country song from the 82nd, something about second chances, and he let it play. When he pulled up at the school parking lot, kids were already rushing through puddles, laughing under bright umbrellas. He stood for a moment, watching them. Their laughter felt like a sound from another world, one he'd forgotten belonged to him. Inside, the hallway smelled of chalk and crayons. A young teacher noticed him and smiled politely. "Can I help you, sir?" "Yes," he said, voice rougher than he expected. "I'm looking for Mrs. Dean, Lila Ward's teacher." A few moments later, Mrs. Dean appeared, holding a folder against her chest. She recognized him immediately. "Mr. Ward, I wasn't sure you'd come." Elliot tried to smile. "I got Lila's letter." Her expression softened. "She talks about you often. She's very proud of her drawings." Then, lowering her voice, she added, "She's been quieter lately, though. Keeps her sleeves pulled down even when it's warm." The words hung in the air like cold wind, Elliot's stomach tightened. What do you mean? Mrs. Dean hesitated, glancing down the hall. Maybe you should talk to her aunt. But, if you can, please come to the art show this Friday. It would mean the world to her. He nodded, though his throat felt dry. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving puddles that reflected the gray sky. Elliot stood by his truck for a long moment, the folded letter still in his pocket. When he finally started the engine, he didn't drive home right away. Instead, he turned left toward the town where Vivian lived. The air was heavy with the smell of pine and damp earth. In the side mirror, the school building faded behind him, replaced by the quiet ripple of the lake in the distance. He didn't know what he'd find when he reached Vivian's house, or what words he'd say after so much silence. All he knew was that the letter had broken something open inside him, something that had been waiting too long to feel again. And somewhere deep down, beneath the guilt and the noise of tires on wet pavement, a father's instinct whispered, "Something's wrong. Go now." The rain had returned by the time Elliot reached the narrow street that wound toward Vivian Holt's house. The windshield wipers beat in steady rhythm, clicking like an old metronome marking his hesitation. Her home sat on a corner lot, painted a fading white with blue shutters. A single porch light glowed, pale against the gray sky. He parked by the curb and sat for a while, engine idling, watching the curtains flutter in one of the windows. For a moment, he could almost hear Sarah's voice again, reminding him to be kind to her sister. But kindness didn't come easy anymore, not when he had so many questions, and no good answers. He finally stepped out, umbrella in hand, the smell of wet asphalt rising around him. Vivian opened the door before he could knock. Her face, though still beautiful in a tired sort of way, looked sharp and restless. "Elliot," she said, surprised. "You should have called first." "I got Lila's letter," he answered quietly. "She said she misses me." Vivian gave a soft laugh that didn't sound amused. Children say all sorts of things when they want attention. She's fine, really. But the way she leaned on the doorframe made him uneasy. Inside, the house smelled faintly of bleach and stale air. Toys were scattered near the sofa, and on the coffee table sat a single mug lipstick on the rim, half empty. Lila wasn't there. "She's at school?" he asked. Vivian nodded, folding her arms. "They're rehearsing for the art show. You know, the one you never had time to attend before." The words stung. Elliot swallowed hard. "I'm planning to come this time." Her eyebrows arched, as if amused by the idea. "Well, that'll be new." He didn't argue. He just looked around the small living room, the family photo of Sarah on the wall, the faint hum of a ceiling fan. It felt like stepping into the past, except the warmth was gone. Everything looked neat but unlived in. Before leaving, he noticed a small pair of rain boots by the door, still damp inside. Tell her I'll see her Friday," he said, and turned to go. "Elliot," Vivian called out. "Don't confuse guilt with love. You weren't there when Sarah needed you. Don't start pretending now." He froze. The rain whispered harder against the porch roof. He didn't respond. There were no words that could fix what she'd said. Back in his truck, he sat with his hands gripping the wheel. The world outside blurred through the rain, and for the first time, he realized he didn't know his daughter's world anymore, her friends, her drawings, her fears. He'd miss more than birthdays. He'd miss the quiet ways a child grows brave or small when no one's watching. The bell from the church down the street began to ring, muffled by the storm. Elliot turned the key and whispered to himself, "I'll make it right." He didn't know then that making it right would soon mean much more than attending an art show. The rain lightened to a mist by the time Elliot returned to Street Augustine Elementary. The sky had turned the color of pewter, soft and heavy, and the air carried that damp smell of crayons and wet paper. Inside, the art room buzzed with the gentle noise of children finishing their projects for Friday's show. Mrs. Dean greeted him again, surprised to see him back so soon. "Mr. Ward," she whispered, smiling. "Lila's just finishing her painting." She nodded toward the far table. Lila sat alone near the window, her hair tucked behind her ears, a paintbrush clutched like a magic wand. She didn't notice him at first. Her little shoulders moved carefully, like she was afraid the air itself might break her concentration. Elliot took a hesitant step forward. "Hey, sweetheart," he said softly. Lila turned, eyes widening. For a moment, she looked confused, then unsure if she should smile. "Daddy?" "Yeah," he whispered. "It's me." Her lips curved just enough to form a half smile. "You came." "I did," he said, kneeling beside her. "And I'm staying for your art show. I promise." She nodded, still uncertain. Then she held up her canvas. It was a watercolor of a house by the lake, his house. The porch swing, the quiet water, even the little blue mug on the rail. But at the center stood a man painted in gray. "That's you," she said. "Mom said you like gray suits." He felt his throat tighten. "It's beautiful, Lila." Her sleeve slipped down as she reached for a new brush. A faint mark, purplish and long-heeled, peeked out on her wrist. Elliot froze. "Honey," he said quietly, trying to keep his voice steady. "What happened there?" She pulled the sleeve back quickly. "Nothing," she mumbled. "I fell off the porch." Mrs. Dean, across the room, glanced over as if she'd overheard. Their eyes met for a brief second, hers full of worry, his full of denial. Elliot forced a smile, though his stomach turned cold. "Does it hurt?" "No," she whispered. "Aunt Vivian said I shouldn't talk about it." The words sliced through him. Before he could speak, the dismissal bell rang, and children began gathering their bags, the room filling with laughter and motion. Lila hurried to pack her paints. "Can I go home now?" she asked, eyes wide, as if seeking permission. He wanted to say, "No, stay with me." But Mrs. Dean approached, placing a gentle hand on the girl's shoulder. "Your aunt's waiting outside, honey." Through the window, Elliot saw the silver car idling by the curb, wipers flicking back and forth. Vivian sat in the driver's seat, looking straight ahead. Lila waved a small goodbye, her fingers trembling just slightly. "See you Friday, Daddy." Elliot managed to wave back, the taste of rain and guilt thick on his tongue. As she disappeared into the mist, something inside him shifted quiet but final. He no longer believed the bruise was just a fall. And for the first time, the silence of his lake house felt unbearable. He turned toward Mrs. Dean, who stood by the door, voice low but certain. "Mr. Ward," she said, "if you love her, watch closely. Sometimes children don't fall, they get pushed." Outside, thunder rolled far away across the mountains, slow and heavy, as if echoing the warning. And Elliot knew the storm had only begun. The rain didn't stop that night. It whispered against the windows of Beaver Lake, soft at first, then steady, like an old metronome marking guilt instead of time. Elliot couldn't sleep. The image of the small bruise on Lila's wrist kept flashing behind his eyelids, haunting him more than any nightmare could. He sat by the fireplace, a single lamp glowing beside the armchair. The room felt smaller now, as if the walls themselves had leaned closer to listen to his thoughts. On the coffee table lay Lila's watercolor, the house, the gray figure, the lake still damp from the rain when she'd handed it to him. Outside, thunder rolled across the ridge. He picked up the phone twice, meaning to call Vivian, but stopped both times. What would he say? Did you hurt her? The question itself felt impossible, and yet the silence hurt worse. Finally, he called someone else, Henry Caldwell, an old friend from college who still lived in town and worked at a local newspaper. Henry answered on the second ring. "Elliot? Haven't heard that voice in ages." Elliot exhaled shakily. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to keep it between us." Henry's voice softened, serious now. "What's wrong?" "Lila, I saw something on her wrist. I think something's off at Vivian's place." There was a pause, the kind that carries more truth than words. "You want me to look into it?" Henry asked finally. "Not yet," Elliot said. He stopped, rubbing his temples. "I don't know what I want, but I can't sit here anymore." "Then don't," Henry replied. "Drive. Go see her. You're her father, not a bystander." The words hit him harder than expected. He hung up and stood by the window, watching the rain blur the lake into silver mist. For a long while, he didn't move. Then, without thinking, he grabbed his coat, the car keys, and the thermos that had long gone cold. The drive back into town was quiet, except for the hum of the tires slicing through puddles. Storefronts glowed faintly under the streetlights, their windows fogged. The church bell rang 9 times, echoing through the drizzle. He passed Street Augustine Elementary again, dark now, except for one flickering light near the gym. Something about it made him slow down. He pulled over, engine idling, and stepped out into the rain. From behind the school building came a faint sound, not quite crying, not quite humming. He followed it, heart pounding. And there, under the covered walkway, sat Lila, her knees pulled to her chest, a small umbrella beside her. "Lila!" He ran toward her. "What on earth? How long have you been here?" She looked up, startled but not afraid. "Aunt Vivian forgot to pick me up," she said softly. "She said she had errands." "Oh." Elliot crouched beside her, soaking wet. "You should have called me. I didn't think you'd come," she whispered. That broke something inside him. He lifted her carefully, wrapping his coat around her small shoulders. The warmth of her body against his chest felt like forgiveness and accusation all at once. He drove her home, the heater humming, the wipers sweeping rhythmically. Lila fell asleep before they reached Vivian Street. Her hand rested on his arm, small and trusting, and he promised himself silently that this time he wouldn't look away. But when he pulled into the driveway, the porch light was off. The house looked darker than before, the blinds drawn tight. He hesitated, staring at the door, rain dripping from his hair. And somewhere inside, he thought he saw a shadow move. The porch steps groaned under Elliot's weight as he carried Lila to the door. Rain slid from his coat and pooled on the mat. He knocked once, then again, harder. No answer. He tried the handle. Unlocked. Inside, the living room lights flickered weakly. The smell of bleach hit him first, sharp, artificial, almost desperate. On the table, 2 wine glasses stood side by side. The television murmured in the background, volume low. "Vivian?" His voice echoed softly. From the hallway, footsteps approached. She appeared wearing a silk robe, mascara smudged beneath tired eyes. "You brought her back?" she asked flatly. "She fell asleep waiting outside the school," Elliot said, voice trembling with anger. "It was dark, raining. Where were you?" Vivian shrugged, pouring herself more wine. "Things happen. She knows how to wait." Elliot's jaw clenched. "She's 7 years old." Vivian looked at him over the rim of her glass. "And she adores you, even though you left. Funny, isn't it? You can vanish for months, and still, she draws you as the hero." He ignored the jab, adjusting Lila in his arms. "Where's her room?" Vivian sighed, gesturing toward the hallway. "Second on the left." He carried Lila in, laying her gently on the small bed. The room was neat. Too neat, no toys, no colors. Just a stack of old storybooks and a single framed photo of Sarah, his late wife, smiling in better days. Elliot brushed a strand of wet hair from his daughter's forehead. There it was again, the faint bruise near her wrist, another darker mark near her elbow. He swallowed hard, fingers trembling. From behind, Vivian spoke, voice low and bitter. "You're not taking her away. She's all I have left of Sarah." He turned. "Then treat her like it." Her expression hardened. "You think you're some kind of savior now? You couldn't save your marriage, or Sarah. You barely save yourself." He stepped closer, tone steady but quiet.
"I don't care what you think of me."
"But if I find out you've laid a hand on her?" Vivian's voice cracked into a whisper. "You'll what? Call the police? Take her away? You think they'll believe a man who's never around?" The words stung, because they were partly true. Elliot had no proof, just suspicion and guilt. Still, something inside him had already decided. He didn't answer. He turned off the light, kissed Lila's forehead, and walked out. In the living room, Vivian had already poured another glass of wine, staring blankly at the window. On the porch, the rain had stopped. The air smelled of earth and something older, the kind of quiet that follows a storm but promises another. Elliot stood there for a long time, hands in his pockets, watching the dark clouds shift over the mountains. He knew he couldn't stay silent any longer. The next day, he would call Mrs. Dean. He would call Henry. He would do whatever it took. Because for the first time, the bruises on Lila's skin felt like bruises on his own heart, and they would not fade until he faced the truth. Inside the house, a glass shattered, then silence, and the night folded back into rain. The next morning came without color. Gray clouds hung over Asheville like heavy curtains, and the lake outside Elliot's window looked as still as glass. He'd barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Lila's small wrist, the fading bruise like a whisper that wouldn't let go. He poured coffee, but forgot to drink it. The phone sat on the counter, silent but waiting. He had promised himself last night that he'd call Mrs. Dean. And yet, his thumb hesitated above the contact list, as if dialing might make the truth too real. Finally, he pressed call. "Mr. Ward?" Mrs. Dean's voice was gentle but tired.
I'm glad you reached out.
"And I'm sorry it's early," he said, rubbing his forehead. "I just need to ask, have you noticed anything strange with Lila? Anything besides what you told me?" A pause. Then softly, "More than once, she came to class with long sleeves. I asked her about it. She said her aunt doesn't like her showing messy skin." He closed his eyes. "Messy skin," he repeated under his breath. "I didn't want to alarm you, Mrs." Dean continued. "But last week, she flinched when I raised my hand to erase the board. It's small things, but they don't sit right." He thanked her, promised to stop by later that day, then hung up. The silence that followed wasn't peace, it was fear disguised as calm. He tried calling Vivian next, straight to voicemail. "Vivian, it's me," he said after the beep. "Call me back. Now." He grabbed his jacket, ready to head out, when headlights flashed outside the window. A car stopped by the mailbox. Then the engine idled, and a man stepped out. Detective Nora Lang, though he didn't know her name yet. She looked early 40s, professional, eyes sharp beneath the brim of her rain hat. "Mr. Ward?" she asked, flashing a badge. "I'm with Buncombe County Police." He froze. "Is something wrong?" She exhaled, voice even. "Your daughter's teacher filed a concern report this morning about possible neglect or harm. Standard procedure, sir. We just need to check on her welfare." Elliot's pulse jumped. "She's with her Aunt Vivian Holt. I was just about to drive there." Nora nodded. "Then we'll go together." They drove in silence down the winding road toward Vivian's house. The storm from the night before had left puddles shining on the asphalt, reflecting the dull gray of the sky. When they turned onto the familiar street, the silver car was gone. The front door stood ajar. Elliot's chest tightened. "Vivian?" he called out, stepping onto the porch. The house smelled faintly of wine and lemon cleaner. The television murmured softly from another room. But something felt wrong. Too quiet. Too still. Nora moved ahead, hand resting near her radio. "Stay here, sir," she said gently. He didn't listen. He followed her down the hallway. Lila's bedroom door was open, the bed empty. Her backpack was gone. Only the small watercolor painting remained on the wall, the one she'd drawn for the art show. It was hanging crooked, one corner bent. Nora's voice broke the silence. "She's not here, and neither is Miss Holt. We'll issue an alert." Elliot's mind spun. "She's got my daughter," he whispered. "She took her." He looked at the floor, where a single damp footprint led toward the back door. Outside, the sky rumbled with distant thunder. Vivian's car was gone, but on the kitchen counter, under a coffee mug, lay a note scribbled in messy blue ink. "You took everything from me. Now you'll know what that feels like." Nora Lang moved quickly, radio pressed to her shoulder. "Unit 12, this is Lang. We have a potential child abduction. Suspect Vivian Holt, silver Subaru Outback, North Carolina plate. Run it now." Elliot stood frozen by the counter, the note trembling in his hands. The words bled through the paper where his fingers pressed too tight. "You took everything from me." He didn't realize he was whispering until Nora looked at him. "Mr. Ward, when did you last see your daughter?" "Last night," he managed. "I brought her home around 9. She was asleep. He stopped, his throat closing. "I shouldn't have left." Nora's tone softened, steady but urgent. "We'll find her. But I need you to focus. Does Miss Holt have family? Friends she might run to?" He shook his head. "Vivian doesn't have anyone left. Not since Sarah, my wife, died. She stayed because she said the kids were all she had." And your daughter trusts her?" "She used to," he said quietly. "Now I'm not sure." Outside, sirens began to hum in the distance, low at first, then closer, echoing through the empty street like a heartbeat. Nora's phone buzzed. "They found her car," she said after a pause. "Highway 25, near the overlook." "Abandoned." Elliot's chest tightened. She wouldn't leave Lila alone. "No," Nora agreed. "She didn't." They reached the site 15 minutes later. The car was pulled over by the guardrail, engine still warm, hazard lights flashing weakly in the rain. Inside, the passenger seat held a stuffed rabbit, Lila's favorite, and a thermos half full of cocoa. "Tracks lead down the embankment," an officer called. "2 sets of footprints, 1 adult, 1 small." Elliot's knees nearly gave out. "She took her down there?" Nora grabbed a flashlight and started down the muddy slope. "Stay close." The rain had softened the ground, and every step sank deep. The smell of wet earth and pine filled the air. Then, through the trees, they saw a small wooden picnic shelter by the edge of the creek. Lila sat there on the bench, wrapped in her raincoat, eyes wide but calm. Vivian knelt in front of her, hair plastered to her face, talking fast, hands trembling. Elliot froze at the sight. Nora motioned for him to wait, then stepped forward slowly. "Miss Holt, I'm Detective Lang. I need you to stand up and keep your hands where I can see them." Vivian turned, voice breaking. "She doesn't want to go with him. He left her. He left all of us." "Vivian," Elliot said softly, stepping closer. "Please, she's just a child. You don't have to do this." "She's mine," Vivian whispered. "Sarah would have wanted that. You know that's not true," he said. His voice cracked, not with anger, but sorrow. "Sarah trusted you to love her niece, not to take her." Vivian shook her head, eyes darting to Lila. "She needs me. I make her strong. She pointed at him. "You make her small." "Vivian," Nora's voice cut through the rain, calm but firm. "You need to step away." For a long moment, nobody moved. The creek gurgled softly below, the wind catching the edges of Vivian's soaked robe. Then, with a shuddering breath, she let go. Her shoulders collapsed inward, and she whispered, "I didn't mean to hurt her. I just wanted someone to stay." "No." Nora stepped forward, handcuffs glinting under the gray light. "We'll talk about that at the station." Elliot rushed to Lila, dropping to his knees. She looked up at him, confused but safe. "Daddy?" He pulled her close, his coat wrapping around her like a shield. "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm right here." The wind carried the faint sound of the sirens below the ridge, mingling with the rain. For the first time in years, Elliot didn't think about deals, deadlines, or losses. He thought about warmth of a small heartbeat against his chest, of forgiveness that didn't need words. Above them, the clouds began to break. A single beam of light fell through the trees, pale but certain. He closed his eyes and whispered, "We're going home." The storm rolled in from the Blue Ridge like a warning. By dusk, the clouds had gathered thick above Beaver Lake, turning the sky the color of steel. The wind shook the birch trees, scattering leaves against the windows like restless hands. Elliot Ward stood by the living room window, phone in hand, scanning the darkness beyond the yard. Leela wasn't home yet. She was supposed to have been dropped off from art class an hour ago. He'd called the community center, no answer. He'd called Mrs. Dean voicemail. And every time he tried again, his pulse climbed higher, his breath shorter. It had been years since he'd felt this kind of fear, the raw, helpless kind that steals reason. The rain came down harder, blurring the world into gray streaks. He grabbed his coat, snatched his keys off the counter, and ran out the door. The roads glistened with water, headlights carving through the dark like thin blades. He drove with both hands gripping the wheel, his jaw tight. He kept seeing flashes of Sarah's face in the glass, not her smile, but the pale, still memory of her hospital room. "Not again," he whispered. "Not this time." Every turn felt longer than it should have. When he reached the bridge over the creek, the old wooden one that led toward the arts center, his heart stopped. There, near the railing, stood a small figure in a yellow raincoat. "Lila!" he shouted, pulling over the car door, slamming against the wind. She turned, startled, rain plastering her hair to her face. Her eyes were red, frightened. "Daddy?" she cried, her voice barely a thread under the rain. He ran to her, slipping in the mud, and dropped to his knees, grabbing her shoulders. "Sweetheart, what are you doing out here? Are you hurt?" She shook her head, sobbing. "I didn't mean to, Mrs. Dean forgot I was still cleaning up. Then the doors locked and I got scared and I started walking home, but—" Her words broke apart in the storm. Elliot pulled her close, wrapping his coat around her, feeling the trembling of her small frame. "It's okay," he said, his own voice shaking. "You're safe now. I've got you." He carried her to the car, soaked through, both of them shivering. As they drove back, thunder cracked like distant gunfire, and Lila gripped his hand tight. "Daddy," she whispered, "I thought you wouldn't come." That hit him harder than the storm outside. "I'll always come," he said, glancing at her through the rain, "no matter what happens." She didn't answer, but her fingers loosened slightly, trusting him enough to fall asleep before they reached home. When they arrived, the power had gone out. The only light came from the faint glow of candles in the kitchen emergency ones he hadn't used since Sarah's illness. He wrapped Lila in a blanket, rubbed her arms to warm her, then poured 2 mugs of cocoa from the gas stove kettle. As the storm howled outside, the house felt smaller, closer, almost like it used to the 3 of them sitting together, Sarah humming by the fire. Now, it was just him and this small girl who looked at him with Sarah's eyes full of questions he didn't always know how to answer. "Daddy?" Lila said softly. "Yes, sweetheart. Did you and Mommy ever fight?" Elliot blinked. "What makes you ask that?" "Because when people fight, sometimes they go away, and I thought maybe that's why she—" Her voice trailed off. He knelt beside her, taking her small hands in his. "Mommy didn't go away because of us, Lila. She got sick, and I wish more than anything that she could have stayed." "Were you sad for a long time?" He nodded slowly. "I was lost for a while. I thought if I worked hard enough, maybe it would stop hurting." "Did it?" she asked, her eyes wide. He smiled sadly. "No, baby. The only thing that stopped it was coming back home to you." Lila leaned into him, and he felt her tiny heartbeat against his chest, steady, real, alive. Outside, thunder rolled one last time before the rain softened. The storm had broken, and somewhere deep inside him, something else did too, a wall he'd built years ago, finally giving way to warmth. By dawn, the storm had passed. The world outside was washed clean, the lake calm again, the trees dripping like they'd been baptized in silver. The smell of wet earth drifted through the cracked window, mixing with the faint sweetness of cocoa and burnt toast. Lila was still asleep on the couch, wrapped in the old quilt Sarah had stitched years ago. Elliot watched her chest rise and fall, each breath a small reassurance that she was there, that she was safe. For the first time in a long while, he didn't rush to check his phone or his laptop. He just sat there, listening to the house creak, to the water dripping from the porch roof, to the quiet hum of life returning. When Lila stirred, blinking sleepily, the first thing she said was, "Did the storm go away?" He smiled. "It did. Looks like the sun chased it off." She sat up slowly, her hair a wild tangle. It sounded angry. "Storms usually are," he said. "But they always calm down when they've said what they needed to." She frowned thoughtfully. "Do people do that too?" Elliot looked at her, truly looked, and realized she was asking something deeper than the words suggested. "Yeah," he said softly. "They do. Sometimes it just takes longer." After breakfast, they went outside to see the aftermath. The yard was scattered with fallen branches and wet leaves. The old wooden bridge down the road had held, though barely. A few planks had loosened, the railing bent from the wind's force. Lila ran ahead and stopped halfway across, her boots splashing in a puddle. "It's still here," she called. Elliot caught up, hands in his coat pockets. The air smelled of pine and new beginnings. "Barely," he said, tapping one of the cracked boards with his shoe. She looked down at the water below, then up at him. "Will you fix it?" He glanced at her, then at the lake behind them. "Yeah, we'll fix it together." Her face lit up, and she reached for his hand. "Mommy would like that." His throat tightened. She would. That afternoon, while Lila painted in her room, Elliot went up to the attic again. He didn't know what he was looking for, maybe nothing, maybe everything. The storm had loosened something in him, and the silence up there didn't feel as heavy as before. He found an old box labeled Sarah Personal. Inside were letters, sketches, and a single photograph he'd forgotten existed. Sarah standing on that same bridge years ago, pregnant with Lila, laughing as her hair blew across her face. On the back, in her handwriting, were 3 words, "Build it stronger." He traced the letters with his thumb, remembering how she'd always said that after every argument, every setback, every heartbreak, build it stronger. At the time, he thought she meant the house or his business. But maybe she'd been talking about this, their family, their hearts. He placed the photo on his desk and sat for a long moment, listening to the quiet beat of rainwater dripping outside. Then he picked up his notebook, the one he'd started keeping since the day Lila came home, and began to write. Novnol sedemnast. The bridge held through the storm. Maybe we did too. I used to think love was something you earned by being perfect, a spotless house, a full account, a plan for everything. But maybe love is just what happens when someone stays. When they show up, even in the rain. He paused, looking at Sarah's picture. I wasn't there when the world fell apart. But I'm here now, and I'm not leaving again. Maybe that's enough to start building something stronger. As dusk settled, the sky blushed with orange and lilac. Lila came running from her room, holding a paper in her hands. Daddy, look! It was a painting, the bridge, the lake, the two of them standing side by side. But above them, she'd painted the clouds parting, sunlight pouring down in wide golden streaks. It's us, she said proudly. And Mommy's the light. Elliot swallowed hard. It's beautiful, sweetheart. Can we hang it over the fireplace? He nodded. That's the perfect spot. They tacked it up together, stepping back to admire it. The last of the daylight hit the paper just right, making the gold paint shimmer like it was truly alive. Lila tilted her head. Do you think Mommy can see it? Elliot smiled softly. She doesn't need to, honey. She already painted it through you. That night, when Lila was in bed, he walked down to the lake one last time. The air was cold, but clear. The bridge stood there in the moonlight, battered but unbroken. He ran his hand along the railing, feeling the rough wood beneath his fingertips. The reflection of the house glowed faintly in the water behind him, warm windows, soft lamplight, and the faint laughter of a little girl. He looked up at the sky and whispered, We built it stronger, Sarah. And for a moment, whether it was memory or miracle, he could swear he heard her voice in the rustle of the trees, quiet and proud. You did, Elliot. You finally did. The first Sunday after the storm carried a different kind of silence. Not the uneasy hush of fear, but the kind that follows a long cry, tender, cleansing, fragile. Beaver Lake shimmered beneath a thin veil of mist. The maple trees were half bare now, their leaves turning from copper to brown, drifting quietly to the water like whispers of the past. Elliot Ward stood on the porch with a mug of black coffee, his reflection faint in the window. For years, mornings like this had felt empty, lifeless. Now they carried something else, not peace exactly, but possibility. Inside, he could hear the small thud of footsteps on the wood floor and the squeak of Lila's chair, the sound of life returning to a home that had forgotten it could be warm. He stepped inside to find her sitting at the kitchen table, still in her flannel pajamas, sketching something with her colored pencils. The smell of pancakes filled the air. What are you drawing? He asked softly, setting his mug down. She turned the page so he could see a picture of the two of them walking by the lake. Us, she said. He smiled. You got the lake just right. You even drew the old dock. She nodded proudly. And the ducks. He ruffled her hair. It's perfect sunshine. After breakfast, they bundled up in coats and scarves and walked down to the water. The air was sharp but gentle, filled with that quiet sound only autumn knows, the crunch of leaves, the distant hum of wind through pine. Lila ran ahead, her boots kicking up leaves, her laughter carrying across the still water. Elliot followed, his steps slower, each one grounding him in this new version of life, one that no longer ran from grief, but grew around it. They reached the dock. The boards creaked softly beneath them. Lila leaned against the railing, staring at the lake's surface. Daddy, she asked suddenly, do you think Mommy can see us? He hesitated. I think... She never stopped. She turned to him, her eyes reflecting the morning light. Even when we were sad? Especially then, he said. Lila thought about that for a while, her small gloved hands gripping the wood. Then I'll wave to her, she said, and lifted her hand toward the sky. Elliot smiled, though his throat felt tight. I'm sure she saw that. On their way back home, they stopped at the old Stonebridge Diner. It was one of those small-town places that always smelled like bacon, grease, and coffee, where the waitress already knew everyone's story. As they entered, Mary Lou, the gray-haired waitress, looked up in surprise. Well, I'll be, she said, smiling. if it isn't Elliot Ward and his little artist. Lila giggled. Hi, Miss Mary. Elliot nodded politely. It's been a while. And too long, she said, pouring him coffee before he could ask. Your Sarah used to sit right there every Friday, sketching in her notebook. He looked at the booth by the window, the same spot, untouched by time. Yeah, he said quietly. She loved this place. Mary Lou's voice softened. She still does, honey. You two keep coming back. That's how love stays. Elliot's eyes met hers. The kind of look that said more than words. Thank you, he murmured. That evening, when they returned home, Lila curled up on the couch with her blanket while Elliot sorted through old boxes in the attic. Most were filled with books, faded photos, and Sarah's journals. He found one labeled Fall 2016. Inside were watercolor sketches of the lake, Lila as a toddler, the porch steps, and on the last page a note. It wasn't addressed to him. It simply read, If this season ever returns to you, let it be gentler. Oh. He stared at the words for a long time, his hands trembling just slightly. Then he closed the book, whispering to the air. It is, Sarah. It finally is. Outside, the sun dipped behind the trees, turning the water the color of honey. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was standing at the end of something, but at the beginning of something good. That night, the wind changed. It came whispering through the trees like a memory that had traveled a long way to find its way home. The last of the leaves scraped gently across the roof, and the lake outside glimmered with a faint silver sheen. Elliot sat by the living room fire, a blanket draped over his knees. Lila had fallen asleep on the couch beside him, her head resting against his arm. The radio hummed softly, an old blues station from Asheville that faded in and out between static, just enough to make the night feel alive. He looked down at her small face, peaceful, unguarded. There had been a time when he feared he'd never see her sleep like this again, safe, unafraid, surrounded by warmth instead of shadows. But tonight, there it was, peace. Real, quiet, ordinary peace. On the table lay the journal he'd found earlier that day, Sarah's Fall 2016. He opened it again, turning the pages slowly, careful not to smudge her faded handwriting. It was like hearing her voice in another room, gentle, thoughtful, alive. The pages were filled with moments, sketches of maple leaves, grocery lists, notes about Lila's first words. And then, tucked inside the back cover, something fluttered loose, a folded envelope, yellowed at the edges. His heart stumbled when he saw the words written in her looping hand. For Elliot, if I'm gone and you're still running. For a long time, he couldn't open it. He stared at the fire instead, watching it move like breathing light. But eventually, his hands stopped shaking, and he unfolded the paper. My love, if you're reading this, it means you've kept going maybe too fast, maybe too far. I know you. You build walls when you hurt, and you call them work. You fill your hours with noise because silence scares you. But someday when you stop, when the noise runs out, you'll find her again. Not me, her. The small girl who carries both of us inside her. She'll say something simple that will break you open, and you'll realize love never left. It just waited. Promise me this. When that day comes, don't run. Stay, and make a home again. The world will forgive you the moment you forgive yourself. Always yours, Sarah. He couldn't move for a long while. The letter trembled in his hands, his breath shallow, his eyes burning. He wanted to say her name, but all that came out was a whisper. I stayed, Sarah. I stayed. The old clock ticked softly in the corner. The sound felt steady now, not accusing. The house no longer echoed. It breathed. He picked Lila up gently and carried her to her room. The light from the hallway spilled across the soft pink walls and the rows of storybooks she'd chosen herself. He tucked her in, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. Good night, sunshine, he whispered. She stirred slightly, still half dreaming. Love you, Daddy. His throat caught. I love you too, sweetheart. More than all the stars over this town. He switched off the light and lingered for a moment in the doorway. The letter still folded in his pocket, not a wound anymore, but a seed. Downstairs, he stood at the window overlooking the lake. The wind had settled, and the water reflected the moon in perfect stillness. In the glass, he saw both his reflection and Sarah's faintly not as ghosts, but as echoes of the love that had built this home. He whispered, "You were right. She brought me back." The radio changed songs. A gentle, old gospel tune. "May the circle be unbroken. By and by, Lord, by and by." He smiled. Not the polite kind he used to wear, but one that came from somewhere deep and healed. Outside, the porch light flickered in the wind, casting a soft glow over the path that led down to the dock. He opened the door and stepped out barefoot, the wood cool beneath his feet. The lake shimmered like liquid starlight. He stood there a long time, letting the night hold him, until he realized something. He wasn't saying goodbye anymore. He was saying thank you. The next morning, when the sun rose, its light fell on the kitchen table on Sarah's letter, on Lila's drawing from the day before, and on a new page Elliot had written in his own hand. "To my daughter, you reminded me that love doesn't live in the past. It lives here in pancakes, in laughter, in every promise kept. Your mother taught me to love. You taught me to stay. That's how we keep her light alive." He left the note there for Lila to find when she woke up. When she came running into the kitchen, still in her pajamas, her hair wild from sleep, she looked at him and said, "Daddy, can we go back to the lake later? I want to show Mommy my new drawing." He smiled, his heart steady. "We can go right after breakfast." And outside, the wind picked up again, not cold this time, but bright, like a promise carried forward. The town of Beaver Lake had begun to prepare for winter. The last of the amber leaves clung stubbornly to the oaks along Maple Street, and every morning smelled faintly of wood smoke and cinnamon. It had been almost a month since the night by the creek, the night Elliot found Lila again, the night the silence in his life finally cracked open. Now his days followed a rhythm that felt almost sacred in its simplicity. Breakfast with Lila, a drive to school, a walk along the lake, and long evenings spent in the golden hum of the fireplace. The world had quieted. Not empty quiet, but peaceful quiet. And yet, every time he looked at Lila's face, there was still that faint shadow, a residue of fear that sometimes crossed her eyes when she heard a sudden noise or dreamt too vividly. He never told her, but each night, he checked her window locks twice, kept the hallway light on, and whispered a prayer before going to bed. On a crisp Saturday morning, the Maple Street Harvest Fair returned an annual tradition that Sarah used to adore. For years, Elliot had avoided it, unable to face the smell of roasted apples and laughter. But this time, when Lila asked, "Can we go, Daddy?" he didn't hesitate. "Of course," he said. "We'll go early." The fairground spread across the church square, strung with orange lights and autumn garlands. Lila ran ahead, her scarf fluttering behind her like a comet's tail. Elliot followed at a slower pace, taking in the faces he hadn't seen in so long, faces that no longer looked at him with pity, but with quiet recognition. He bought her cocoa from Mrs. Dean's booth, where she was ladling steaming chocolate into paper cups. "Mr. Ward," she said warmly. "I didn't expect to see you here this year." Elliot smiled faintly. "I didn't expect to be here either." Her eyes softened. "She's doing better, isn't she?" He nodded, bit by bit. Lila tugged his sleeve. "Daddy, come on. There's an art tent." Inside, children's watercolor paintings lined the walls. Elliot wandered behind her until one piece caught his breath. It showed a small house by a lake, a window glowing gold against the blue of twilight. At the bottom corner, written in careful letters, "Home again by Lila Ward, age 7. He stared for a long time. "You painted this?" Lila nodded, shy but proud. "Mrs. Dean said to paint something that makes us feel safe." Elliot's voice thickened. "And this makes you feel safe?" She smiled. "Because you're there now." The words hit him like sunlight after years of rain. He crouched down, pulling her gently into his arms. "I'm so proud of you," he whispered. A familiar voice broke through the moment. Looks like she inherited her mother's gift. It was Henry Caldwell, wearing a wool coat and holding a notepad. His hair had turned whiter, his grin smaller but warmer. "Henry," Elliot said, standing, "you covering the fair?" "Every year," the journalist said. "But this time, I'm writing something different. Not news, just hope." He gestured toward Lila's painting. "Would you mind if I mention her in the piece? The story's about healing, about people finding their way back." Elliot hesitated, then smiled. Go ahead. Maybe someone out there needs to read it. Henry scribbled a note, his eyes glinting. You've changed, Elliot. A year ago, you wouldn't have stepped foot in this tent. I guess life has a way of rewriting us, Elliot said quietly. They shared a look the kind two men share when words are unnecessary. Outside, a bell rang as the carousel started up again, its music echoing softly through the square. Lila ran toward it, waving a ticket in her hand. Come on, Daddy, Elliot laughed. Go ahead, I'll watch. She climbed onto a painted white horse, her cheeks flushed pink in the cold. The carousel lights glowed against the gathering dusk, warm, gentle, alive. He watched her spin, her laughter rising above the music, and thought of Sarah, how she used to say light never really disappears. It just changes where it shines. And in that moment, he knew. The light had found its way back home. The night air in Beaver Lake was crisp and clean, smelling faintly of pine and roasted chestnuts. After the fair, Elliot drove home with the windows half open, letting the cold air sweep through. Lila sat in the back seat, clutching a small paper star painted gold, her prize from the carousel booth. She hummed softly, a tune Sarah used to sing, something about starlight and wishes. The melody drifted between them, like a memory coming home. Did you have fun today? Elliot asked. The best, she said, yawning. Everyone smiled at me. They should, he said gently. You light this town up. No. When they reached the house, the lake reflected the moon like a coin of silver resting in dark glass. Lila ran inside first, still wearing her red scarf. The house glowed warm against the cold, every light like a small promise kept. After she went to bed, Elliot sat by the window with a blanket draped over his shoulders. The festival lights still flickered faintly in the distance, soft and far away. He opened Sarah's journal again, tracing the faint indentations of her handwriting. Promise me you'll show up. He smiled, sadly. I did, he murmured. I'm finally here. Then he turned to a blank page and began to write slowly, deliberately, the way people write when they know every word will matter. Sarah, tonight, I watched our little girl laugh under the lights you loved. She wore your scarf. She's taller now, braver too. When she smiled, I saw you, not the you I lost, but the you that stayed. The part that taught her kindness, that reminded me of what love looks like when it forgives. He paused, the pen trembling slightly in his hand. There were years I didn't know how to live with your absence. I tried to fill the silence with work, noise, anything that didn't sound like grief. But it never worked. It wasn't until I learned to listen, really listen, that I heard you again. You weren't gone. You were waiting in her laughter. He looked toward the hallway, where Lila's nightlight cast a faint glow on the wall. You told me once that love isn't a feeling, it's a choice. I understand now. Every morning I make breakfast. Every time I stay when it's hard. Every time I say, I love you, instead of, I'm sorry. That's love. It's small, steady, and real. And maybe that's enough. He closed the notebook gently, feeling the weight of peace where sorrow used to live. Later, he stepped outside. The porch light burned softly, the snow just beginning to fall, lazy flakes drifting down like forgiveness. Across the lake, the reflection of the moon shimmered with quiet grace. He remembered Sarah once said, You don't find light, you make room for it. Maybe that was what he'd done, cleared space for the light to return. The old radio in the living room hummed faintly, a station playing somewhere between static and music. He turned the dial until the voice came through clear. Good evening, neighbors. It's a cold night here in Asheville, but remember the smallest flame can warm the darkest room. Elliot smiled. He sat on the porch steps, the cold biting at his hands, but his heart steady and alive. He looked up at the stars. Sarah, he whispered, we're okay now. For a long time, he simply sat there, listening to the wind through the trees, the soft rhythm of the lake lapping against the shore, and the faint sound of Lila breathing upstairs. And then, quietly, almost like a prayer, he said, Thank you for waiting for me. The next morning, sunlight poured through the kitchen window, catching on the gold paper star Lila had left on the counter. Beneath it, she had written in her careful, uneven handwriting, For Mommy. So she knows we found the light again. Elliot smiled through tears. He pinned the star above the fireplace, beside Sarah's photo and Lila's lake painting. The house no longer felt haunted. It felt alive, full of warmth, laughter, and echoes of forgiveness. That night, when Lila asked him to read a bedtime story, he didn't pick one from a book. He told her their story about a father who forgot how to see the light, and a little girl who taught him how to find it again. She fell asleep before the ending, but he whispered it anyway. And when the storm passed, the house by the lake still stood not because it was strong, but because love had kept the lights on. He kissed her forehead and turned off the lamp. The snow outside glowed pale under the moon, and in every reflection, he saw the same thing. Not sorrow, not loss, but home. Home, in every light. The first snow of winter came softly, as if the world didn't want to startle the quiet that had settled over Beaver Lake. By morning, the entire town looked reborn, rooftops brushed with white, the lake frozen thin at the edges, and pines bending under the gentle weight of peace. Elliot Ward stood by the window with a cup of coffee that had gone cold long ago. He wasn't watching the snow so much as feeling it the way it muted the noise, covered what was broken, and made even the oldest scars look new. Down the hall, the sound of small footsteps. "Daddy," Lila whispered, still in her pajamas, her hair wild from sleep. "It's snowing," he smiled. "I see that. First snow of the year." She pressed her nose against the glass. "Can we build a snowman before school?" "Maybe after," he said, "if you promise not to throw the first snowball." Her grin was pure sunlight. "No promises." He laughed quietly, and for a moment, the house felt full again, like laughter had been waiting all these years just to return home. By noon, the lake shimmered with light. Elliot took Lila to school, greeting neighbors along the way. The people of Beaver Lake had changed toward him not because they'd forgotten, but because he'd stopped hiding. He helped Mr. Jackson clear snow from the post office steps, stopped by the diner where Sarah once waitressed, and left a small donation for the foster families fund. The waitress, gray hair in a bun, smile soft, said, "It's good to see you again, Mr. Ward." He nodded. "It's good to be seen." That evening, the winter festival filled the town square with lights. Strings of gold hung from every lamppost, and the air smelled of cinnamon, pine, and wood smoke. Elliot and Lila walked hand in hand past the crowd. She wore Sarah's old red scarf, too long for her small neck, trailing behind like a ribbon of memory. They stopped by a booth where Mrs. Dean sold hot cocoa to raise money for the children's library. "2 cups?" she asked, smiling. "Make it 3, Elliot said. "For Henry. He's pretending he's too tough for cocoa." The old journalist grumbled from behind a table of donated books. "I heard that, Ward." They all laughed, and for the first time, Elliot realized how much the town itself had become a kind of family, a web of people holding each other up through small kindnesses. Later that night, they walked home along the lakeside path. The snow squeaked beneath their boots. Lila ran ahead, twirling, catching flakes on her mittens. "Daddy, look! They sparkle!" He smiled. "Everyone is different. Like people. Like us? Exactly like us." She slowed her steps, thoughtful. "Do you think Aunt Vivian's okay?" He hesitated, then answered softly. "I hope so. She's getting help now." Lila nodded, looking toward the sky. "Mommy would want that." Her words, simple and pure, echoed through the cold air like a prayer. When they reached home, the fire was already lit. Elliot made tea while Lila arranged her small collection of dried leaves, the ones she'd saved since fall on the mantel beside Sarah's photo. Each leaf had a name written in crayon. Patience, courage, home, love. "Did you name them?" he asked. Lila smiled. "You said Mommy liked naming things that made her happy. So I did too." He couldn't speak for a moment. The simplicity of her heart undid him. He crouched beside her, pulled her close, and whispered, "She'd be proud of you, sweetheart." After Lila went to bed, Elliot sat by the fireplace. The snow outside glowed under the moonlight, and on the table lay Sarah's journal, open to her letter, the one that had saved him. He read it again. "Promise me you'll show up for her." He smiled sadly. "I did, Sarah," he whispered. "I finally did." Then he took a pen, pulled a blank sheet of paper, and began to write not to Sarah this time, but to himself, to whoever might need the words someday, to anyone who's ever felt too far gone, Redemption doesn't arrive with thunder. It comes quietly, disguised as an ordinary day. It's your child asking for pancakes. It's the neighbor who waves back. It's the decision to forgive yourself before the world decides you're worthy. If you're still breathing, you still have time to stay. He folded the note and tucked it into Sarah's journal. Beside hers, her words, his reply. 2 lives, 2 stories, now bound by the same truth. The old radio on the shelf flickered to life, static turning into the warm hum of a local announcer. "Good evening, folks," the voice said. "It's a cold night here in North Carolina, but wherever you are, may you find a little light in your home and in your heart." Elliot smiled, turning the dial up slightly. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and endless, wrapping the world in silence. He looked toward Lila's room, saw the faint glow of her nightlight under the door, and whispered, "Good night, my girl." Then, after a long pause, to the empty chair across from him where the firelight seemed to dance a little brighter, he whispered, "Good night, Sarah." And somewhere beyond the lake, the wind carried his words upward toward the stars, toward the unseen, toward the place where love outlives time. The snow fell slower now, each flake catching the lamplight before melting into the earth. Inside, the house pulsed with warmth and laughter, no longer haunted, no longer hollow. It was home, home, in every light. Sometimes the quietest mornings carry the loudest echoes. After all the storms, the bridges, the letters, and the long nights by the lake, the Ward house finally filled with laughter again. You could almost hear Sarah's old wind chime outside the window, dancing in the light breeze, not mourning anymore, just singing softly that life goes on. The sound of pancakes sizzling, a little boy's toy truck rumbling across the floor, and a girl's watercolor painting taped proudly above the fireplace. That's what redemption looks like when it finally takes root. Elliot didn't find peace in grand gestures or perfect endings. He found it in the quiet rhythm of showing up breakfast after breakfast, bedtime after bedtime, until love stopped being an apology and became a habit. Lila grew into laughter again, her fears fading into colors on a canvas, while the old lake outside reflected a home rebuilt not of money or pride, but of patience and forgiveness. And maybe that's the true miracle, that a man who once hid from his pain learned to listen again to a child's voice, to the whisper of his late wife, and to the small, steady heartbeat of a family rediscovered. In every candle lit, in every cup of coffee poured before sunrise, there lives a quiet vow to do better, to stay present, to love without conditions. Love and redemption aren't born from perfection. They grow from presence. Real happiness doesn't arrive with wealth or success. It blooms in the everyday grace of caring for one another. Like the porch light that glows through a Carolina winter night, one simple act of kindness can guide a lost heart home. Because everyone deserves a second chance, and every home can be rebuilt when love leads the way. Maybe that's something to remember next time you sit down to dinner with family, pass the cornbread, and notice how the sound of laughter fills the gaps that words once couldn't. The warmth you feel in that moment, that's life reminding you, you made it through the storm, and the bridge still stands. So, dear friends, as you sit with your evening tea or your morning coffee, take a quiet minute to let this story settle in your heart. If it touched you, press 1 inch the comments. If you think we could tell it better, press 0, because your voice matters here. And if this story found a small corner in your soul, share it with someone who might need a little light tonight. Stay kind, stay warm, and may every bridge you cross lead you back home.